think, and thank you, Human Rights Campaign, and of course, Univision Arizona, our house is your house, our casa es su casa. Thank you for coming, and of course, for this strong effort in these difficult times, you know, as a country, and for most of the minorities, we've been struggling with these policies and the times that are changing dramatically in these recent months. And of course, I don't want to take too much time for this presentation. I just want to say thank you for being here, and hopefully we're going to get some good results for this discussion and to make the Congress look what is important in this time. So thank you very much. My name is Leon Felipe Gonzalez, and feel free to be here as much as you want. Our casa, as I told you, es su casa. Thank you. Gracias. Y voy a cambiar un poquito a español. You know, this is Spanish event. Voy a cambiar a español y básicamente recalcar lo que estábamos comentando, que son momentos complicados, lo vemos todos los días. Platicamos con activistas que empiezan a hablar sobre las situaciones que se están viviendo en el país, a nivel congreso, a nivel local, a nivel nacional, y muchas veces algunos me dicen, bueno, cuando pensamos que las políticas iban a llegar hasta un límite, bueno, cada vez nos sorprendemos más hasta dónde están llegando estos eventos. Ayer, por ejemplo, veíamos que las personas que están pidiendo asilo político no van a poder solicitarlo bajo razones de violencia doméstica y tampoco persecución a causa de pandillas, lo que marca un cambio muy importante en las políticas y también un poco el rumbo de una agenda que ya conocíamos. Así que considero que es muy importante que este tipo de eventos y las discusiones que se van a dar para que el Congreso pueda ayudar y voltear y tener proyectos que tengan un apoyo importante, pues se logre resultados que tengan beneficio en la comunidad LGBTQ, en las minorías, en la comunidad inmigrante. Así que gracias a todos ustedes por estar esta tarde aquí y nada, fuerte aplauso para ustedes.
I just want to thank you and the leadership of Univision here in Arizona. This is, I think, my third or fourth time to be able to visit the campus here. And on behalf of the LGBTQ community, thank you for standing with us. Thank you for constantly standing with us and standing up for what is right and what is just here in this community. We're grateful. So thank you for having us. I just want to thank each of you for taking the time for this discussion today. It is a real honor to be here with each of you. You are all on the front lines of these battles in so many ways and on so many fronts. As community leaders, as elected leaders, as volunteers, and I look forward today to hearing from you and to learning from you. Before I say anything else, I think it's important for all of us just to take a moment to acknowledge that today is the 2-year anniversary of the massacre at Pulse nightclub that took 48 members of our community and allies, the majority of whom were Latinx. And we said at the time, we have stood together with the survivors and with the families of those who were taken from us many times over the course of these 2 years to say that we honor them with action. And it is quite appropriate that today, on the anniversary of that massacre, we are all here today talking about action, talking about how we can stand up for the broad, diverse communities that we all represent here in the state of Arizona and around this country. So I'll just take a moment for a brief pause for all of us to honor them, and then we can move into a discussion. Thank you. Before we move into introductions and then just open casual discussion about what everyone is doing, the battles that we're facing here in this state and around the country, I don't have to tell any of you seated around this room today that all of our communities are under attack by this administration, by this president, by this vice president, and by many of their hateful appointees throughout government. Whether it's their direct assault on LGBTQ people specifically, their assault on the rights and protections of transgender people specifically, their attacks on DACA recipients in this country, their refusal to pass the DREAM Act. That list goes on and on and on, and if I continued, we could be here for days listing out all that they have done to attack and demean marginalized communities all across this country. You also know that the path to standing up and stopping much of what is happening in Washington, and it is so nice to have a few days outside of Washington and to be with you here in Arizona, but the path to our ability to pull the emergency brake on this president and on this administration goes right through the state of Arizona. If we are going to, actually let me change that, when we finally in November are able to take back and have a pro-equality, sane majority in the House and in the Senate, we will have done that through this state and the elections in this state. And so all of our collective work between now and then is key and critical. And I know we've all been told this a million times. In fact, knowing what each of you do in this room, I bet you've said it a million times that this election is the most important election. How many elections have we all said that, right? Well, guess what? This election is actually the most important election of our lives. This is our opportunity to turn resistance into action and to take all of the grassroots enthusiasm that so many of you have been helping to lead and to build for us all to work together in coalition and drive that energy to the ballot box on election day. And so I am so grateful to be here with you, and I thank you for taking the time, and I look forward to hearing from you, learning from you, and seeing a lot more of you between now and November.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Chad, for joining us, and thank you to Univision for hosting us in their beautiful facility. I would be remiss to also not acknowledge what happened 2 years ago in Florida with Pulse. As a gun violence survivor, I know how important it is, especially as we're looking to 2018 and beyond, that we are not focusing on moments of silence, but looking at abilities for action. And the Human Rights Campaign has been at the forefront of not just acting on progressive issues, but making sure that they are really putting their money where their mouth is by making sure we're investing in Arizona to ensure that this is a place where people aren't writing it off and saying, this is the place that elected Joe Arpaio multiple times, it's the place that passed SB 1070, but saying, in a place where we elected Joe Arpaio and passed SB 1070, there are opportunities to change the face of the country by electing people who will represent us better, but also to ensure that we have people who are working to ensure that all folks, whether they are LGBTQ or LatinX or both, are able to live full and healthy lives. So thank you, Chad, for joining us. As I mentioned, my name is Daniel Hernandez, and I'm one of the 30 members in the House of the LGBTQ Caucus that we started last year. It started as a conversation between the three of us, sort of as a joke, saying, hey, it's been 22 years since the first openly gay member of the legislature, and yet we've never had a forum to actually have a conversation about issues impacting the LGBTQ community. Funnily enough, all three of us in the House and in the Senate were Latino and male and gay. So we said, we're not really fully representative of the LGBTQ experience in Arizona, or even the LatinX experience. So what we wanted to do was create a forum through our position as legislators to actually have these conversations and to convene stakeholder groups like this. So on National Coming Out Day last year, we launched formally. We've had a couple of stakeholder meetings. We even had our first fun event. We brought Pangina Hills from Drag Race Thailand to liven it up and to have some fun. But really what we are hoping to do is to partner with organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and with many of the others that are represented here today to make sure that, because we are not every single part of the LGBTQ community, that we are creating a forum for those who are not being heard. Because we have a legislative majority in the legislature and in the Congress that are determined to undermine our fundamental rights. So I'd love for everybody to take a chance to introduce themselves. I'll start with my colleagues here on the right if they want to take a minute to introduce themselves.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and do that. I just had a disclaimer. I'm here against my doctor's orders, but I wanted to make sure that I was here for this important conversation. Again, my name is Tony Navarrete. I wear many different hats, one of them being as a state representative and also a member of the LGBTQ Legislative Caucus. I also sit on the Ryan Bike Planning Council and sit on the Health Committee for the state of Arizona. So, these issues around LGBTQ community are really important to me and really important to the work that we all do in the state of Arizona. And I'm just really happy to be in a room full of folks that are on the front lines of a lot of the work that to advance the LatinX community, and particularly the LGBTQ Latinx community. I also wear another hat of being the deputy director for one of the largest Latino civic engagement organizations in the state called Promise Arizona. So lots of different hats, but very excited to continue to be working alongside of many folks that are here today. I'm very happy to have you here today. So thank you.
First and foremost, welcome to Arizona. My name is Cesar Chavez. I am state representative for the 29th Legislative District here in the state of Arizona. And when we say that Arizona is changing, it truly is. Arizona has gone from a state where we had a supermajority of the Republican Party to a place where you have 4 openly gay individuals that are actually invited to the table, that are able to persuade decisions in a legislature where before that was unspoken of. You have a place where, as somebody who was formerly undocumented sits on a legislative body, you have a state where 40% of the legislature is comprised of women. So when we say that Arizona is changing, we're definitely representative of that. And I believe that forums such as this and alliances that we've built with community members, that truly is the way of creating that change. I'm very honored to serve with these 2 fine gentlemen because we bring different aspects to the legislature and with stretched relationships with other members of Congress. So we're really looking at the bigger picture here. How do we change our communities? How do we change our state? And most importantly, how do we change our nation? We just saw a court ruling on which the scenario of it was over a cake. It was not over a cake. It was over the rights of an individual to be able to share who they are and express with freedom. Is that not what the First Amendment is all about? So we're really seeing a great change here in Arizona, and I'm very proud, very honored to sit here with each and every one of you and to represent this great state, which we're only going to see greater change.
Thank you, Representative Chavez.
My name is Natalia Costa. I'm still, I applied for political asylum. I came from Mexico, escaping really, the violence and everything over there. I was beaten almost to death over there when I was in Mexico. So I escaped that. I came, to this country with just $100. I crossed the border illegally because my dreams, they were, bigger than anything else. So I came to Phoenix, specific to this city. I didn't know the language. Now I speak 3 languages. I have 2 degrees in fashion design. And I'm trying to do my dreams. And last year I went to New York Fashion Week and I presented my line there.
Wow.
That's my story.
Thank you, Natalia.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me here. My name is Dagoberto Bailon with Transfer Pueblo. I'd like to take a minute, to maybe look around and acknowledge who's missing in the room, because I think that's super important, because I know there's a lot of different perspectives, but I think it's important to ground ourselves in the realities that there's still people missing, even in this round table, discussion. So. And then I can talk a little bit about what we do, So Transfer Pueblo is an LGBT migrant organization. So we have been working to bridge the gap in the services that the state and other organizations can't bridge, So we provide, we work in economic justice, making sure that people who are coming out of detention, LGBT migrants, either newly migrated people, have access to income, because it's not enough to get them out. They still need to make sure, we still need to make sure that they're successful. We work in health justice, making sure that we are actually providing free primary care to undocumented LGBT people, and we have about 200 people that we see on a monthly basis, right? We provide services for people inside and outside of detention, understanding that there's a bunch of undocumented people even outside of detention, right? And specifically with LGBT communities, there's different immigration reliefs that they can apply for, but because there's not the education out there or the information, a lot of these people don't get to do the one-year asylum, or they don't know that they qualify for a U visa or a T visa, whatever that might be. So we support them in that. But far more than anything, we're building the leadership of LGBT migrant people. And that means that we are investing a lot of the resources that we have to make sure that the next time you invite someone is not going to be me, right? That the next time that somebody speaks in this kind of circle is going to be one of our coordinators who came from Mexico, was put in detention, right? Came out and now is leading one of our projects. And I think that is the core of what we do, making sure that we're developing the leadership of the people who generally would not be in these spaces, right? And so also I'm an undocumented immigrant, currently undocumented. I think it's important to understand that the work that we do is also to open up conversation about what change looks like beyond the status quo. And so I know you all have seen the crazy things that we've done, but I think that has allowed to really push and build an organization that has more than 500 membership, right? And that's really committed to making sure that Phoenix is a safe place where trans women, gender non-conforming people have access, have economic abilities, they have access to health. They're not afraid of calling the police, right? And that actually, with the current decisions that we see with asylum, right, that we're creating different structures to make sure that none of our people who are already in the immigration system get denied and sent back home. And I think that's one of the biggest things currently in our minds is like, how do we create some strategy for those people who already applied for asylum and now won't qualify because of the gang violence or the domestic violence ruling that came out. So thank you.
Thank you for coming down. David?
Hello everybody, I'm David Martinez. I'm the co-chair of the Human Rights Campaign here in Arizona. I have the great pleasure of representing a team of about 24 local volunteers that are engaging the diverse communities and volunteers for the Human Rights Campaign to help us achieve some of our political outcomes. And I look forward to the conversation today. Thanks for being here.
My name is Carmela Ramirez, and I'm a native of Arizona. I just spent the last 30 years working for the city of Phoenix as their arts and culture director, and I'm retired now. I contract with a company called Creative Plus Cultural. It's a marketing and media firm. And I contract with them particularly because we have a large gay staff. We have a great interest in promoting the future of the Latino and the LGBT community. At nighttime, I'm also a performer. I've been a Latin jazz salsa singer for the last 40 years. And what I can say is that I use my platforms, my connections, my production experience, whether it's a festival, conference, town halls, or anything else, to create platforms of communication. So I work with a lot of different organizations, anyone who's willing to listen to me. And I try to feature as many of them possible in productions that we put together. We just did a Dia de Niños, we're getting ready for back to school. We have a huge festival at Wild Horse Pass called Loteria. Just producing a lot of different things. I work heavily with PBS, who also has the same interest that I do. I've been their chair for about the last 6 years, and I just switched out of that. So I think the best thing I can say about myself is that I'm a communicator, I'm into social justice, and I can use many platforms to enhance communication and what we're doing and getting this out to the public in a safe, informative, and educational way, which is extremely important to me. I have a big problem with festivals, even our Gay Pride Festival, even though it's very successful. I want to see us represented as human beings and for what we are and what we really bring to the community. And I think that means a lot. And I want to work on that.
Thank you, Goodman. Maybe next time you and Caesar can do a duet, because he's a singer as well.
Oh, he is.
I love that.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
We have time.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, Carlos Castañeda. I'm with Phoenix Pride. I'm a transplant. I'm originally from Texas, but when my mom came to this country, country, also illegally. The reason she came over was because she wanted a better life for my sisters and for me, and that was through education. And somehow we ended up here in Phoenix, where I grew up and I was raised. So although I'm a transplant, I feel like a native at heart because I know nothing but this Arizona heat.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, 36 years to get used to, and still every time it gets a little harder and harder. Maybe it's my age. One thing that I push is always education. I feel education was my outlet. It was my escape. It was where I could feel comfortable, whether it be books or curriculum, to be myself. Because I didn't always feel like myself. Even when I was in school, I didn't always feel like I was able to be myself. I am a proud Sun Devil, but I wasn't out in college because I was afraid. I was afraid of what other students may think of me. Not a whole lot of people had my skin color. Not a whole lot of people had, my squish necessarily. So I was always afraid of being outed, but then eventually I became comfortable with that. So although yes, Phoenix Pride was an awesome party, the work that we also do in the community can't be understated. LGBT scholarships are a huge one that we push because, again, that goes back to the core. We throw a party so that our community can have access to other things, community grants program and so on and so forth. And absolutely, I'm the first Latino to, not the first, but one of the first, Gerardo was also on, to kind of step up to the table and say, I'm not represented at this table, but it's up to me to get to the table. And if you can't make a room for me, I'm going to pull up my chair and I'm going to sit down. And so slowly but surely, we will get our voice heard for La Comunidad. Another thing I'd like to say within our own culture that we need to work on, which is, it's historical, and la tradición es la tradición. I heard this from my mom a long time ago. I didn't agree with it then. I don't agree with it now as much as I love and respect her. And that is, lo que se ve no se pregunta. And I don't like that because I am who I am, and if you can't ask me about me being gay and identifying that with me, then we have no conversation, and that's not the right place to start. So really what I would like our community to do is start having that conversation with our family, our straight allies, and now my mom is my biggest hero and champion.
Thank you so much for being here. One of our fellow elected officials.
Hi, my name is Yelenia Aguilar. I currently serve on a school board district, so I actually got to vote for the first time, run for office, vote for women, and win my election. So for me, it was a true American dream when I voted for the first time and won my election. Like many of you guys, I was undocumented, and like Carlos has mentioned, education is the only way to close the achievement gap and to end generational poverty. Without all of the teachers and the school system, public school systems, I wouldn't be here. So I am very lucky that I get to continue to live my dream through advocacy. I now work for Unidos US, formerly NCLR, the largest civil rights organization in the nation, advocating on behalf of Latinos. So I do live my dream. Not only do I serve on the school board where most children attend, and it's a dual language school district, so that means that most of our children, especially the children who need it the most, are learning in Spanish and English. I got to benefit from bilingual education. So I understand the importance of our Latino children learning in their native language. And we're an English-only state. For those of you guys who are visiting and don't know, we're an English-only state. And sometimes, if you understand the policies, they are not equitable. So in some districts in our state, the children who need it the most, like our Latino children or the marginalized community, do not get to participate in these programs. So through the work I'm doing with Unidos, hopefully in the future we can work on policies where all children get to participate in bilingual education, just like I did. So yes, and also sitting on a school board and learning about policies and how we can affect the lives of our LGBT community, and it starts very young, and ensuring that we are passing equitable policies and resolutions that align with, the dignified lives that we want for all children, for all of our communities. So thank you very much for having me.
Hi everyone, my name is Janie Pearl-Starks. I'm originally from Guadalajara, Jalisco. Grew up in East Mesa, and when you hear East Mesa, I think what comes to mind and what hopefully will be changing is a hotbed of hate. Whether you're a member of the LGBTQ community, immigrant community, a person of color, that's where a lot of the negative things got their start and unfortunately continued, and hopefully this will help change it. I'm here representing Mountain Park Health Center. We're a nonprofit community health center. We serve a majority of people who are low income, people of color, refugees, and we have a big emphasis on what are we doing to take care of the LGBTQ community the right way and the responsible way. And we're proud to say that we have a very high population that trusts us with their health care. And that's something we're continuing. And then also I sit on the board of Equality Arizona. We're an advocacy and awareness organization, has thousands of people across the state, and we're really here working on how are we going to get involved in the next election and what can we do to make sure that the issues concerning LGBTQ people are addressed and that we're coming together and that it's not just a single focus, but what are all the issues and how can we partner to make those things better for everyone.
I am Christiana Hammond. I am with the HRC Arizona Steering Committee, working the outreach group to work with the transgender community. I also happen to be a operations director for a wedding venue here in the Gilbert area. And as you've all heard, our industry's kind of been involved in the wrong way with equality lately. But we are open to all. And one of the reasons that I'm involved with HRC is because of the big push that they have for the Equality Act, which is a lot of the reason that we want to get the right people in so that we can get this thing passed. Because one of the things that truly seemed very unfair working in a venue is getting calls from LGBT couples that want to get married and they all have to ask if that's something that we allow them. And I'd really like to have something passed where nobody gets that.
Well, thank you. Before I hand it over to Justin, I wanted to make sure we framed today's conversation. Well, some of you I've known for years, others I had an opportunity to meet because of Gerardo, Tony, or Caesar recommending you, but we're really excited to have you all here. Today is an initial conversation, so we're not going to solve every problem today, but what we'd like to do is start a conversation with the Human Rights Campaign and with Chad about how we here in Arizona, especially those of us in the LatinX community, are seeing some of the issues that are being pushed by the Trump-Pence administration and the trickle-down effect that's happening here in Arizona. And what we can do to partner with and sometimes work with different organizations to really fight back against this extremist agenda that's not impacting just those of us in the LGBTQ community, but in the LatinX community as well. So I'll hand it over to Justin. I'm excited to hear some of the answers, but I know I'd sent all of you the email with some of the sample questions, so we're looking forward to digging into some of those topics. So hand it over to Justin.
All right. Really quickly, I'm Justin Unga. I'm the state director for Arizona's Human Rights Campaign. Right over there is Stan Williams, our deputy manager for HRC. And my role here is to be your moderator, so I'm not going to spend a whole bunch more time talking about myself. A couple quick things for members of the media. We'll wait until the end after this discussion to engage with any questions, and I'll point to my colleagues over there to moderate that portion of our program. I'm going to try to keep us within a 30-minute time frame. If it gets a little hot and heavy, I'll take down names and we'll go in that order. You guys ready? All right. Let's launch right in. Some of you have already sort of dug in to some of these themes thematically, but let's start with this. What are some unique challenges faced by LGBTQ people of color, particularly Latinx people? Anybody want to take that on?
I can briefly just start with my role on the Ryan White Planning Council. So one of the things that we've noticed in Maricopa County, and quite frankly, Maricopa County is the largest hub in the state of Arizona of people. And one of the things that we've noticed is that there has been a huge increase in terms of health issues, a huge increase in STI and HIV new infections. I represent the 30th district, which is central West Phoenix, downtown Glendale, southeast Peoria, and the zip codes that overlap in my district are half of the top 10 of highest new infections of HIV and STIs in the state of Arizona. So for me, I think it's important for healthcare groups to really begin to prioritize and push an educational campaign, making sure that there's resources available in the West Valley that are going to hopefully reduce the number of new HIV and STI infections that are targeting primarily Latino and immigrant communities.
As As a graduate of Maryville High School, I appreciate you saying that. That's the West Valley for those of you that know.
To piggyback off of what Representative Navarrete is saying, I think one of the other things is the administration has been pushing this agenda, which is abstinence only, which eliminating the few sex ed programs that already exist and cutting the funding has had negative outcomes, particularly, as Representative Navarrete said, in low-income and Hispanic communities, because what we're seeing is these are already communities where they have higher rates of STIs already, but if we move over to a model that's abstinence only and are not talking about the reality, which is how to protect yourself and how to be informed, you're going to have many young people who are not going to have the knowledge or the ability to know how to make responsible decisions. So I appreciate you for bringing that up.
Yeah, no, I agree. And those conversations start at a very young age, and having policies in school districts that really respect, that encourage sexual education and talking about, all issues, LGBT, every issue, that's important. And I think there's a lot of not only religious and cultural barriers that not only exist in our community but exist in other communities. So working with school districts, school board members, leaders to ensure that we are educating and advocating on behalf of our families, and it starts at a very, very young age, having these conversations.
I would say, I agree with Tony, right? The infections for Black and Latino people are going up, and I think it has a lot to do with a lot of policies and restrictions, right? When your body is the only thing that you have say over, of course people are not going to use condoms, and of course people are going to decide to make these kind of decisions because that is the only place where you get to make a decision. So I think it is important to understand that, and it's also important to understand that some of the campaigns that are currently launched to prevent HIV and STI infections among men are very transphobic, right? I think we're talking about men who have sex with men, but in this case, some of the infections that are happening are actually straight men who are having sex with trans women, and trans women are women. So I think part of the challenge there is, how do we make sure that as people we are making sure that we're launching campaigns that that straight people and trans women can relate to, right? Because not everybody wants to see abs and beautiful bodies. Let's keep that and also add something else, because we need to make sure that people are still getting tested. I think another thing that we're seeing here locally is with the closing of Backpage and what is the other website? Craigslist, and the manifestation laws on top of that in Phoenix, Arizona. I think a lot of Black women and trans women, right, are now risking themselves, putting themselves out there when they engage in sex work, and I think we're going to see higher criminal records for them, right, and they're going to get processed more often. So I think it's important to understand that we need to start figuring out how to fight this, because we are putting, and we have now pushed all of this work that happens in a sort of safe place. We're putting these women back on the streets, and that is not okay. I think in terms of economic opportunities, we need to make sure that we're creating and building a state that really supports, right, LGBT identities, so that people who are gender non-conforming and trans can continue to have a place to work, right, and that they don't get fired just because of who they are. And when we talk about health, I think it's important to look at the mortality issues in zip codes, right? You have a higher chance of living more in Scottsdale than in South Phoenix or West Phoenix. And that is because we are not having hospitals, right? Maryville, just that side of town, right? They just closed the hospital, and the city decided to let's figure this out, because we need to make sure that people in Maryville don't have to drive 30 minutes, because those minutes, each second counts for people who are in need of emergency care. And so I think when we look at the whole picture, when we talk about LGBT people or people of color and their needs, I think there has been a lot of progress made by some of the organizations here present, but I think there's still, we need to push further, right? Because I think we're sitting complacent, but I think it's time for us to really look at what are some of the risky decisions and risky policy that we can start supporting, so that we can make a true change in the people who are not here, right? Because the people who are actually affected by some of these policies I don't see them here. So I think it is important also, and I think to close that is to open up a space so that sex workers, so that people who don't have health care are able to partake in these conversations.
I think that you brought up an interesting and important point, which is in Arizona and nationally, we don't have any protections for employees to be able to have their jobs and to be protected regardless of what LGBTQ identification they use. We reached a major milestone this time for the first time in 18 years of it being introduced. From what we can tell, we were able to introduce the first bipartisan Employment Non-Discrimination Act in Arizona. Didn't get heard. It didn't get assigned really to a committee where we actually had a shot of getting anything done, but it was an important milestone because, as we know, as people of color, as LGBTQ folks here in Arizona, there is a lot of discrimination that we still have to confront every single day in the state of Arizona. So being able to have some protections is going to be vital and is going to be one of the next big fights that we're going to have, because I think a lot of times people said, well, marriage was the big thing, and now we won that, now we can end. But I think the reason we're having this conversation is to say, yes, and here are the other things that we need to be focusing on, and really looking at the intersection that we have as LatinX people with our LGBTQ identities.
I will note that in the city of Phoenix, which did pass a non-discrimination ordinance, one of, I believe, 5 cities in Arizona, Tucson, Tempe, Flagstaff, Phoenix, and Sedona, is that the last one? Yeah. Are the city of Phoenix court case in which HRC signed on to an amicus brief with our local partners at ACLU actually protected the city's non-discrimination ordinance. So we have made some advancements locally here in Arizona, but there's still a patchwork of laws that aren't protecting Arizonans.
Speaking of laws, I want to go back to what Donna was saying earlier, because I think she touched on it very briefly. Our manifestation laws, which has a disparate impact on LGBTQ communities. You want to go a little bit more into that for the group, people who don't maybe know what that is?
Sure. So manifestation laws are laws that seek to criminalize women, specifically trans and black women, for intent to prostitute, right? And so what that means is, how many here have held a taxi or waved to your friends to stop? We all have? Yeah? Cool. So you've all committed intent to prostitute. So does that mean we're going to get booked? Probably not, right? Because these laws were actually created for trans and black women, right? And are implemented in this red light district. So I think it is important to think about. And there's a bunch of crazy things, like if you have more than one condom, right? If you if you stop a vehicle and ask them if they're a police, that's an intent to prostitute, and you can get booked for that. And so I think when we talk about what are the challenges for LGBTQ people, I think specifically those manifestation laws are something that we can work on to change.
Thank you, Tyler. Yeah, and I would want to add to that, because this is an issue that I've worked on a lot in the West Valley, because we have a lot of high traffic areas where there is prostitution taking place. And one of the biggest concerns from a lot of community members and a lot of local leaders is the fact that these individuals aren't being prosecuted for simply trying to, work or whatever it may be, but really trying to go after the perpetrator, whoever the pimps are, or whoever is actually trying to buy the sex. So the city of Phoenix, from what I was told, does have a policy in place to not book an individual immediately based on what you would call, I guess, manifestation laws. So I would like to, continue that conversation a little further with you, maybe off topic or away from here, just so we can make sure that the city of Phoenix is actually doing their due diligence and keeping their word with the members of the community. So I just want to add that, because we have had these conversations with the city of Phoenix.
Thank you, Representative. A few of you sort of remarked on this in your introductions. Let's talk about the kinds of attacks we're seeing from this administration. And maybe as a second part of that, how are we as organizations fighting back? What kinds of attacks are we seeing from this administration?
I can start off by saying that in my former employment, which was literally just Friday, I worked for the healthcare community health center, like Mountain Park. One of the major grants that we had was working with farm workers. Farm workers. Yeah, farm workers out in the rural communities of Maricopa County, which we still have. In fact, Adelante is one of 3 community health centers that had funding for migrant and seasonal farm workers. And what we don't see here in the urban setting is that there is a rather large and substantial LGBTQ crosswalk that does affect the farm worker community. Many of them leave their country of origin because they fear for their lives, only to find out that they're picking fruit for all of our tables. By the way, we wouldn't eat with these people without the work from these people, and yet they can be beaten to death in the field out in Tonopah. And they don't have protections, and they're disconnected from the fabric, which is either Phoenix area or urban areas, either here in Cochise County or Union County. So there's a lot of disparities with those populations that I saw all the time, and very little resources to go around. We'll run the field.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Well, I think when I remember Equality Arizona, as soon as the new administration went in, it was almost like every day we're like, okay, do we do a statement of this? Do we do a statement of this? And they just kept coming. And I think an important thing for us is when the regulations on DACA changed, we said, okay, this impacts us, and transgender in the military. And I think just now recently, the domestic violence, someone talked about that, that was just yesterday. And so I think the attacks are so frequent that it's very real that people who are already tired and who are being attacked, now how do we fight back? And I think that's why a key piece is, okay, we need to mobilize, and this election is very important. At Mountain Park, one of the things we're doing for the past year or so, we've asked all our patients, do you identify as an LGBT? And we make sure that our providers know that, so that is a very active conversation. And then we also know, do you have food insecurity? Is there homeless issues? Like, what else? Because so many of these things are connected. But we have seen that there's a little bit more fear now because we don't know what the next tweet is going to say and how that's going to impact.
I think I would add to that as well. The first thing that happened when I was elected was I had to work on a resolution to ensure that we pass a safe school, safe community, to send a message. And I had this conversation no, we are not protecting them from ICE, but we are sending a message to our families that they're students and they are safe here. So that was the first thing that happened. But then with the recent DeVos comment that school boards or boards have it's up to them, it's up to their discretion to decide if they want to deport the students or not. So saying things that are really causing more fear, given that in the past during SB 1070, a lot of families left. They went back to Mexico, they moved to other places. This is something that is happening again with the current administration. So ensuring that we are fighting for them in whatever way or form that we can in our capacity. But it was mentioned, it's something every day. So we're always, especially those of us who have lived in the shadows, who live in fear, how do we continue this? We're all reacting to it, and we all have PTSD, and we're all just trying to figure it out. So it's exhausting.
The key here is to remind any body of government the economic power that the LGBTQ community has. I want to remember 2011, SB 1062, in which it provided an individual, kind of like what we saw here with the bakery shop. It would provide discrimination against anybody really, but specifically targeted to the LGBTQ community. The Super Bowl then called the governor and said, if you pass this bill into law, we will pull out of Arizona, and we will make sure that our alliances do so as well. Now, this is an entity that could have lost millions of dollars, but regardless, because of buying power that the LGBTQ community has, was very, very apparent there. You have corporations who side with the LGBTQ community, and we need to continue growing those alliances, building the trust of these alliances, to remind, especially an administration that seems to be driven by money and the color of gold. We need to continue to remind them where we stand as a community and what our presence has to offer as well.
I think one of the other big things that we're seeing is an emboldening of people's language that the president is using. So in 2016, he spoke repeatedly about, what do you have to lose? You've seen what this group has done, you've seen what that group has done. But what we've lost is protections for dreamers. We've seen that he calls us rapists and animals, and that he's banned transgender people from being in the military. And I think one of the other things that we need to be mindful of is the growing amount of hate groups, especially here in Arizona. I was just talking to some folks from the Southern Poverty Law Center where they're seeing an uptick of hate groups here in the state of Arizona because of the emboldening, because of the Trump-Pence administration saying it's okay to call people animals, it's okay to call people rapists and murderers and thugs. So what we're seeing is this fatigue that we all are getting because like, oh, what crazy thing is he going to say today? But at the same time, those of us who are being impacted are being really talked about in ways that are very different than any other administration has ever talked about its own people. An attack on the press, an attack on the Latino community, on the LGBTQ community. And then I think most importantly is there's this attempt to divide us. And one of the things that we sometimes fall into the trap of doing is really falling into that idea that, you know what, they're not coming after me on this one, so I'm going to sit this one out. And then we're leaving it up to those who are being directly attacked to stand up just for themselves. But what we really need to be doing, especially as we head into 2018, is standing together in unity, even though sometimes we may be uncomfortable with the people we have next to us. No offense, Tony. But really standing united, even if we don't agree on 100% of things, because the reason why we keep talking about 2018 being the most important election is not because the other elections weren't important, is that every year the stakes get higher, especially after Trump and Pence became the president and vice president. So I think we need to be cognizant of this fatigue that we all have, but remember that we need to stick together because there are going to be so many attempts between now and the end of November to try and divide us and to try and put us against each other because it's worked in the past and we've let it work.
And I do want to add a little bit, I just think about the history of Arizona, where we were in 2010. You know, prior to SB 1070, we had a series of anti-immigrant legislation. You know, in SB 1070, you know, the Show Me Your Papers law was really the cherry on top. And what happened during that time is really transformed Arizona to really think civically and getting more people registered to vote. And since 2010, you know, you've seen, you know, hundreds of thousands of new Latinos being registered to vote, or now you have the majority, or you have the large majority of those who even get the early ballot being Latinos from ages 18 to 24. So we no longer have the, you know, Russell Pierce. We no longer have Joe Arpaio. We no longer have Andrew Thomas. We no longer have all of these crazy people that have really just dug in on this hateful rhetoric. And we've been able to build power, and we're continuing to build power. And I think what we're seeing across the country is that we have the same players, but they're at the national level. And that's not going to fly anymore in Arizona, but we have to continue to build power, you know, do that voter registration. Every time I hear a story or something that the administration is doing, I'm like, perfect, how many voter registrations can we get today? And how many folks can we get to commit to vote in the August primary and the general election? So I think that we're in a place right now where I would like to think that a lot of movements are actually kind of working together more than they ever have that I've seen in my lifetime. And we just have to remember that at the end of the day, if we're not getting our folks on the voter rolls, if we're not getting them out to vote, we're going to continue to lose. We're going to continue to face the same discrimination, the same budget cuts, the same policy attacks. So I'm looking forward to this election, not necessarily because I think it's the most important, which it is extremely important. We've had a lot of important elections in Arizona. This is another one. And I think that, you know, this is an opportunity for us to flex our muscle as a movement, not just go on Facebook or social media or, you know, just rallies, but really do the hard work of going to door and getting some of these families out to vote.
I really feel this administration in particular has set the nation back like 50 years. And his expertise is dividing and throwing things at the wall to see what will stick, and it's never going to stop. And whether it's him or anyone else, you know, if we wind up with a future president like this, we're going to be up against the same thing anyway. To me, it is about getting out the information, education, not only for us as individuals, but my biggest concern is getting the families of individuals such as us to understand our economic power and the voting power that we all have, and getting down into the core of support so that our youth are not so afraid to step forward because they have the support at home.
The morning of Trump's inauguration, I went outside to take out the garbage, and there was a swastika painted in my alleyway. And I'm Latina and Jewish. And I just took a deep breath and said, here we go. And unfortunately, it's been from all angles and all sides. And I think Representative Chavez, you mentioned when the Super Bowl called the governor's office and said we're pulling out. I think part of that was the groundswell with the open to everyone signs in the community and the small businesses that eventually it got to that level. And so I think the importance of voting is going to be key. At Mountain Park, we're excited. We just heard back from the county. We offered to be election place. Our Maryvale office, actually 16th, 7th Avenue Thomas, will be our early voting site and a polling place on election day. And when you think about the fear that people have of going to vote, I know when I had to do poll watching, on purpose sometimes, it's an intimidating neighborhood you have to get through. And so to know that our community, the people we serve will know, come to La Clinica, come to Mountain Park, you're going to be safe here, and we'll be able to vote. That's a baby step in the right direction.
Yes. So we're hearing the theme of voting quite a bit, which I think, Janie, your comment right now takes us is a perfect spot for our final question on this before we turn it back over to Chad. What's the most important thing for us to be paying attention to as we head into November this year? What do we think?
For me, collaboration. I can't stress how much scary and fatigued I was as well. In fact, I took a sick day the day after because I was so afraid. Both my husband and I said, I don't even want to wake up. I can't. And then the attacks came and that fatigue set in. But then when I realized I can rely on my community to prop me up or to prop each other up, to call my mom and say, Mom, I'm scared of what's going to happen, not only like to us as a community, but my Latino brethren and everybody, people of color in general. And my mom always, my ally, number one ally, reassured me and she made me feel better. This is coming from a Catholic conservative Mexican mom to say, mijo, it's gonna be okay. I've been through worse. We're gonna get through it, but we're gonna get through it together. So we do have differences, but what binds us together is much stronger, and I've seen it around in this group. And I think that's what, for me personally, it's how can we collaborate, how can we link arms at this point and rely on each other.
I think looking at primary turnout numbers are going to be really critical to identifying what the general election is going to look like. I know the three of us here, you're a new member now, but we're all part of the National Hispanic Caucus of State Legislators, and fortunate to sit on the national on the chair for the Latino elections and voting. And for us, we're going to prioritize making sure that people turn out for the primaries so that they begin to build a culture of voting. And then once it comes time for the general, because they already voted in a primary, we feel pretty confident that they're going to vote in the general. So I think those are just kind of like a good numbers to look at to see what the general election is going to have, what the turnout's actually going to be.
I think it's important to collaborations. I agree. I think it is extremely vital more than ever to really dig deep within organizations and really explore the racism that exists and doesn't exist and how to build from it. So one of the things I think that is important is understanding that what Trump has done tremendously well, right? He has created this racist narrative about every single one of us, people of color. And what has worked is that even within our own communities, we have become very prone to saying, well, that's not my issue, right? Or when we don't understand, we don't seek the education to really support and back some of these issues that are very important. And so I think that, yes, collaborations, yes, numbers, but also understanding that a lot of the push in Arizona has happened because the communities have come together and organized. There have been amazing work done at the grassroots level to really push all of these people to vote. But far more than that, I think what we're seeing is that because of these initiatives and because of organizations who have told our brown and black brothers and sisters, like, you matter, you're important, now we're seeing elected officials that look like me, that look like us, and then it is actually contributing to making sure that people are doing something, whether it's voting or whether it's actually standing up in the middle of a restaurant and saying this is racist. And so I think it is important. I think if we are to see true change in America, because I think as of now, America has failed. I think Democrats have failed. I think everybody in America has really failed because, including myself in this, right? Because we have allowed Trump to get elected. And I think we continue to see all of these attacks. And yes, we have press conferences. And yes, everybody is like, oh my God, this is awful. However, we have not actively as organizations gone to the detention centers where these kids are being held and held it down. We have not gone outside, out of the White House, right, and done a march for all of our rights. I think what we are talking about is complacency. And I think if something is to change in November, it has to come from elected officials, not being afraid to really talking about this racism that exists currently in America, right? And the reality is that what is happening right now is, I call it like the last frontier, right? I think white supremacy is trying to resist because soon enough, people of color are going to be the majority, and white people globally are, I think, already the minority. So I think it is important to understand that if we are to build true partnerships, and as people of color, we need to dig deep and see how we can fix these silos. And actually, the silos are like those racist walls that don't allow organizations or leadership to go forward and maintain the status quo.
Anybody else? November.
Let's kick ass.
You know, I think one of the big things is that we're looking to not just November, but as Dago has said very eloquently, afterwards we need to make sure that we're holding those elected officials accountable. So step one is going to make sure that we are taking the energy of all the marches and all the rallies and all the protests and boycotts and everything and putting that energy towards getting tangible results. And that's going to mean taking back the House and hopefully taking back the Senate, so that we can hold the president and the vice president accountable. But then, it's after we get those folks into office, making sure, and I'm saying this as an elected official, that you hold our feet to the fire, because one of the things that I hear from a lot of my fellow elected officials is, well, I don't have any cover. You guys aren't calling me. When the NRA calls, people get afraid of voting on things, but our side doesn't call and put the same kind of pressure, and the same with other progressive issues. So for the LGBTQ community, for the LatinX community, we need to make sure that we're better about mobilizing people once they're in office to push forward the progressive ideas and agenda that we have to make sure that we're protecting everybody. Because if we don't, we're going to miss an opportunity. Just because Trump will be president for another 2 years after we take back the House and the Senate doesn't mean we can't be pushing and moving forward an agenda to try and protect those who need the protection that they've lost over the last 2 years.
And it's hard too, because a lot of people don't know how to contact you. It's as simple as that. And that's not just us, that's the community in general. Nobody understands that we have that power. So getting the word out about that and making sure that it's out there as much as possible, and anyone that we're working with, is to spread that word. Or to have town halls or a big barbecue, whatever. But I mean, garden salad Sundays, but to talk about it, and keep it going and letting them understand that they have the power. It's that simple. If we do pick up the phone and say something, but a lot of people don't get it. That's right. I'll hold the first part.
So good stuff. Thank you, everybody. Good stuff. Chad, you want to close us off?
Yeah, just briefly, I want to close by again saying thank you. Hearing the work that each of you are doing on the front lines of these battles, I know that each and every one of you, some things you spoke about and some I know went unspoken, but you're not only doing the jobs that you are paid to do, you are also today juggling multiple challenges and multiple jobs given what we're facing from this administration and also from other statewide electeds. I am incredibly optimistic about where we're headed this November and where we're headed in 2020. I truly think when we all do our jobs, we're going to look back at this moment in history and we're going to look at it as one of the great awakenings of our democracy. Folks are standing up, showing up, marching, not just registering to vote, but volunteering to register others to vote, canvassing, knocking on doors to turn out voters, making phone calls, as happened in the state of Alabama with the incredible election of Doug Jones, who today is our 245th co-sponsor of the Equality Act. Elections matter. The election of Danica Rome in Virginia, a race that folks said we had no chance of winning. Today, Virginia's self-described chief homophobe, Bob Marshall. Today, he is her constituent. And it is just such a symbol of what we can do as a community when we are organized and when we collaborate and we are unified in coalition. And yes, one of you said, if we don't have to all agree on 100% of every damn thing, what we agree on is that our opponents, they are unified in coming after all of us and all of the communities that are represented here and those that aren't represented here. And you mentioned the power of the economic buying power of the LGBTQ community. The political power of our community, when we are organized and mobilized. In the last election, it was 5% of the electorate that identified as LGBTQ. That means 5% of the electorate walked out of a polling station in a swing state and told a stranger that they were LGBT or Q. We know that there's a lot of research that shows folks under the age of 24, 20% identify as LGBTQ. In this state, where we are today, it is 200,000 voters identify as LGBTQ. You all know the margins that we win and unfortunately lose by. You add our allies to that, you add the allied vote to that, and when we're organized, when we're mobilized, and when we turn out, we can win elections. And that's what we look forward to partnering with you all on in all of the ways that we can and are legally appropriate for us to coordinate and collaborate in elections. We look forward to doing that because we want to, yes, win in November. But winning is just the first step because you have to win elections to pass protections at the local level and ultimately at the federal level. And so we're going to succeed this November and we're going to have a night of celebration. And then, like the representative said, we're going to get up the next morning and we're going to roll up our sleeves and we're going to be focused on the 2020 elections. And I do believe that come January 2021, we'll have a Congress that can pass it and a president that will sign the Equality Act into law and the DREAM Act into law and a host of other things that our diverse communities need. So thank you all for being a part of this dialogue. Great.